What's going on, guys? Welcome back. It is another Q&A session. It has been quite a while since I've done a Q&A, and honestly, it's been quite a while since I was posting regularly. I did that whole video a month thing in December. I just want to take a second. I know a lot of you probably don't care, but there are another good number of you who may be trying to figure out how to post a lot of content yourselves. And so this is something that I've personally struggled with. Before December, I would work on an edit and never really hit a point where I felt like it was done, and maybe just throw it away, maybe not. I don't know. I always had a hard time just picking a project to begin with, and then once I picked it, seeing it all the way through to the end. So what I've found is that after December, number one, I was a little bit burnt out, just making a lot of content and working really hard. And number two, I didn't have deadlines, so I was running into that same problem where, yes, I had ideas of things that I wanted to execute, but I would get mired in the details, and I would kind of look at that edit and be like, oh, it's not perfect, and kind of walk away and come back. Whereas in the month of December, I had a deadline. Every night, I had to have a video out, whether I thought it was the best thing I'd ever made or whether I thought it was, it had to go out the door. And so what I've been trying to experiment in the last week or so, I don't know if you've noticed, I've got like 3 videos up in the last week compared to 3 videos all of February. So definitely making some improvements, but I'm doing some experimenting on setting deadlines for myself and working off of that. So hopefully I can bring you guys more content, and I hope you appreciate it. Questions and answers. You've got questions. I supposedly have answers for you. So we're gonna just dive right into those and start firing them off. Look, I have phone to read questions. First question comes from, really? We're going to enunciate. Farvanugan. That's as good as you're going to get, Farvanugan. Question. What does the Atlanta crew do to safeguard from knocking each other's video signals out while flying together? Does everyone simply avoid plugging in while someone is in the air? What power output do you set your VTX to? Basically, he goes on to say that him and a couple of his buddies are having trouble where they can't seem to keep from knocking each other out of the air, even using 3 channels as far away from each other as possible and 20 feet away when plugging in. Okay, so you got a couple of things going on here. Number one, in Atlanta, we pretty much all run max output. I've toyed around with 200 milliwatt when I was doing more races last year, but for the most part, I'm running 600, and Steele's running 800, and John's running 600. I have no idea what Nick's running these days, but you get the idea. We're running high output video transmitters. Now, number one, we all have pretty good gear for the most part. So our receivers are working well, our VTXs are not broadcasting all over the band. There are some cheap Chinese VTXs that are just really bad about putting noise out on other frequencies. And if it's got a little bit of noise on other frequencies, and then you have 2 guys on, and then they're both putting a little bit of noise on other frequencies, it can have harmonic effects. So that a little bit of noise here and a little bit of noise here combines to make a peak here. So yeah, you have to have good gear, number one. And number 2 is a little bit of etiquette. Even with all of our precautions, you have to be careful. If there's one guy flying, one guy plugs in, and now the guy flying, he's probably doing okay, but kinda, it's not the best video. Now, if you plug a second quad in where there are multiple channels that are close to his receiver, while his intended quad that he wants to be watching the video from is a long ways away, it's gonna stomp all over it. You can't have 2 quads plugged in the pit while somebody else is out flying. Just not, you plug in, you take off, and then the next guy can plug in and take off at most. And then a little bit of common courtesy. If you sit there and you're like, oh, there's already 3 guys in the air and you're one that isn't flying, maybe wait on at least 1 or 2 of them to land and also unplug, not just land. Refer back to not more than 1 quad plugged in the pit while somebody's flying. You can plug 4, we've plugged like 4 or 5 in and then taken off all at the same time, and you're usually okay, depending on the environment. Some environments are worse than others. Some places we're only able to fly 1 at a time, but that's kind of rare. Usually we can at least get 2 guys up in the air. Also, another thing, your VTX is gonna be very important. For instance, a lot of the cheaper VTXs, what they do is when they power on, so you've got your channel set. Let's say race band 8 for example. What that VTX is going to do is, some of the cheaper ones, is it's going to run through all of the channels before it gets to the channel that it's supposed to be at, and it's going to broadcast just a little bit on each one of those as it goes through getting to the channel that you've got it tuned to. Some of your nicer VTXs like the Tramp don't do that. I forget exactly how they do it. Maybe they do it in pit mode output until they get to the channel that they're supposed to be on, or they just come on the channel they're supposed to be on. I think both the Tramp and the Unify Pro, if I'm not correct, like 90% sure, both of those do not cause blips. If you've ever been flying and somebody powers on and you see a little blip, it's because their VTX is running through the channels and they stomped on you for a split second. So yeah, good gear, separation, and just common courtesy, and you're most likely going to be okay. Another thing to consider is if the guy has a directional antenna and an omnidirectional on his diversity setup, if you plug in directly in front of his directional antenna, I'm talking about patches, I'm talking about pepper boxes, and exactly where that thing is aimed, even though it's not on the right channel, that can overpower him. I've had that happen to me where somebody plugged in right in front of my directional antenna and knocked me out of the sky. All of these things are things to consider. For the most part, it's a mixture of common courtesy, good technology, and just good RF practices. I hope that helps. Next question. This question comes from Toxic FPV. That's a much easier name to say. How do you store your batteries? Yeah, how do you store your batteries? I don't mean how many volts or how you store them, but what do you use to store them? Do you use any kind of metal chest or something? I don't want to burn down my house. Sorry about the bad English. It's okay. I got the point of your question. So me personally, I have a couple of storage solutions. I have long-term storage and short-term storage. For the batteries, like for airplanes that I don't fly very often, or things that I get into and then kind of move on and pick other aspects of the hobby, like 3-inch builds and stuff like that. Those are batteries that get used but not very often. I put those batteries at storage voltage, and I do have an ammo box that I have vented, and those live inside of that. For my normal flight packs, what I personally do, because I go on the road a lot for work, when I go away for work, I put them in storage voltage, but I also store them in a lipo-safe bag in my oven. Yeah, nobody's turning on the oven. I live by myself. When I'm not here, nobody's here. And if it catches fire in the oven, that's a pretty fire-safe box. Yeah, I could be out all of my lipos because they're all stored together, but I don't really have a better solution. So far, that is the best thing that I've figured out, and it's worked so far. I've not had, well, first, I haven't had one catch fire, and second, I have had some die in the storage bag, which that was weird, but that's a whole other point. I think I've pretty much answered that question, so we're going to move on to the next question. So next question is coming from First Person Beard. First Person Beard asks, what are your video export settings when uploading to YouTube? So far, no matter what I try, looks extremely grainy once YouTube reprocesses it. Okay, to answer this question, instead of just saying, these are the settings I use and this is what you should use, what I would rather do is explain to you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. So, when YouTube compresses your video down, they're using what are called codecs. And codecs are basically ways to encode the data that is in the video itself to present it to your computer so that your computer knows what colors to light up on the screen, right? And the way that it does that is it transmits data only for when things in the frame change. So for instance, on this video here, the background for the most part is pretty much static and is not changing. The only information that's getting updated is when I'm moving. See, I'm making a whole lot of pixels move now. And so it's not transmitting as much data. It's saying, hey, this thing moved over here, blah, 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 blah. Whereas when we're flying FPV, we're moving really fast through an environment, which means that every single pixel from frame to frame is updated, which puts a whole lot of demand on the video streaming sites and also on that codec. We're basically maxing out the amount of data that needs to be transmitted for good flight footage. Now, some of the things that YouTube does in terms of how they operate is they say that, hey, if you're going to upload SD, or standard definition footage, we will allow you to transmit at this many megabytes per second. If you're going to give us HD footage, like 1080p or 720, we will allow you to transmit at this many megabytes per second, a little bit higher. And if you're going to give us Ultra HD or 4K or whatever the heck they're calling it these days, we're going to give you even more megabits per second to transmit. Now, what a lot of guys do, and what I'm guessing you're probably doing, is you're shooting in 1080-60 and trying to upload in 1080-60. And now what that is doing is you got the 1080p, so you're not at the highest number of megabytes per second that YouTube will allow. You're just kind of at the middle section. And you're doubling your frames, which if you're going from 30p to 60 frames per second, you're now having exactly double the amount of data per second. So what I've done is I'm no longer doing 60 frames per second. I personally shoot 2.7K 30 FPS almost all the time on my Hero 5 session. And then on this I shoot 1080p, and then in Final Cut, I upscale everything to 4K. That way I am hitting the higher megabytes per second for YouTube, and also only doing 30 frames per second so that I'm not having to transmit as much data. When I did 1080p 60, I couldn't get it to work out perfect. No matter what I did, I always had a lot of really bad pixelation, especially when you had like a lot of greens like grass or trees going by. Everything just got really pixelated. I've had success with this. I've told a couple other people about it, and they seem to have had success. I know others, including my friends like Steele, swears by optimizing for the YouTube codec, which I personally just haven't been able to get that to work for me. Your mileage may vary. I'm more inclined to be an advocate of recognizing the constraints of the system, which is YouTube, and kind of playing to its strengths. So I upload upscaled footage that's at 4K, and then, or shoot at 4K, like this Q&A, I'm shooting at 4K. I do the 4K, 30 frames per second, and it's working for me. Hope that helps. Okay. Next, Matt Walker asks, "Hey Kevin, I must ask, do you only use Fat Shark antennas? I know all you guys get freebies and all, but what do you prefer as FPV antennas?" So, if it's going to be on your goggles, it doesn't have to be the most resilient. I put the TBS Triumphs on my quad because those just take a beating, and they're pretty good antennas. I don't know if they're the best, I'm not an RF expert, but they're good enough for my needs, and they just stand up to tons of abuse. On the goggles, for my omnidirectional antenna, I like to use the Mad Mushroom from VAS. It is one of the best cloverleaf antennas that I've ever tried. In a lot of scenarios, it even gets better reception than my directional antenna. Granted, the directional has higher gain and does a better job when things are on the other side of a bunch of trees or the other side of a building or concrete wall or whatever it is. So yeah, I like the Mad Mushroom on one side, and then on the other side, I use the Immersion RC 8 dBi patch antenna. And the reason I use that is because it's very small. It is very hard to break. It fits in my case really nicely, and it works really well. Are there better directional antennas? Yeah, there's ones with higher gain. I feel like when you're mounting it on your head, it's really hard to use something with a much narrower window of what it's looking at. With the 8 dBi, I believe it's basically a 90-degree window, or maybe it's 45, I forget, but it's a fairly wide angle that it is looking at. And when it's on your head's going to move around. In the past, I had once used the 13 dBi patch, which I think is freaking huge, and you had to like do head tracking, and that was really hard to fly and do this and keep track of where the quad was and turn your head around. With the a little bit lower, you can just kind of point in the general direction that you're like, all right, I'm mostly going to fly this area, but I might go further in that direction, so I'll point the patch that way. So that's kind of the setup that I run. I do want to try some pepper boxes and some other higher gain antennas and interesting things. But for now, it's Mad Mushroom on one side and a 8 dBi immersion RC antenna on the other. Okay, next question. Here we go. This question is from Michael Brewer. Kevin, can you give me some advice on how to gauge how close you are to the ground? I seem to have a difficult time coming out of a dive and bottoming out. Do you look for visual cues or just feeling? Thanks for the great content. Okay, so this is something that I honestly struggled with as well when I was starting out, and it's something I still struggle with when I change setups, whether it's motors or props. And that's kind of... The trick is figuring out just how to do the timing when you start adding throttle. And for the longest time, I just crashed a lot. And I was flying with steel and schizo, and I'd crash and they'd be like, what happened? And it's just like, I screwed up. Because I didn't want to say, like, I don't know when to add power. And so I would bottom out a lot of times early on. I don't do that so much anymore unless I'm kind of changing setups, but it's something you just have to get a feel for, exactly how high above the ground you need to start adding power and what angle you need to be at. And you'll kind of get the feel for it. Sometimes you'll even, as you like get close to the ground, you have to like bottom out, and then that like air cushion, you get a little bit of ground effect as you get really close to the ground, will like save you in those last inches. And that's kind of how, if you notice, a lot of guys will just catch it at the last possible second. And the reason for that is they're getting more lift as they get into ground effect. So it's more likely that you're going to catch it in those last couple of inches than overshoot or completely go above it. But that's neither here nor there. Sorry, but you just kind of got to wait and get the experience to go along with that. Okay, next question. Woohoo! Okay, Tom Koffel asks, what is the absolute maximum you personally have ever discharged a 4S LiPo to, and have you discarded it if it was too low, or did you keep an eye on it and continue using? Again, assuming the lowest you've gone was under 3.2 volts per cell. I've definitely gone lower than that. I think the lowest I've gone is somewhere around 10 volts total. Give or take, it's hard to say. They don't exactly fly the same when you bring them back. Don't charge it even at 1C at that voltage. Yeah, maybe just give it like even 0.1 amp until it gets back up into a normal voltage range of 3.7 volts per cell or higher, and then up it to 1C. But yeah, you can probably bring those batteries back. Be very diligent and careful and keep an eye on it and check it every couple of minutes and just put your hand on it and see how hot it's getting. And if it's getting hot, just toss it, throw it away. It's not worth it. Don't want to burn your house down over it. But more than likely, you'll be able to bring it back. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A section. I got this guy coming in, wanting to say hi. Say hello. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A section. I do appreciate you guys coming. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, click that like button, subscribe, come back. I've got lots of more content coming, lots of big ideas that I want to talk to you guys about, and some flying and cool stuff coming. So I appreciate it, guys. We'll see you next time, and later.